Hello, my name is Dr. Candice Nicole Hale. I am an instructor at Alabama A&M University, and I'm going to be reading my paper today for the ACETA Conference. So I'm going to get started. My title is Black Bodies Suffering in America, a Perpetual Misery Machine in Colson Whitehead's The Nickel Boys. I can't breathe. Get your knee off my neck. Black Lives Matter. These phrases are hashtags that Black people wish we didn't have to flash and scream incessantly on social media, on signs, or on t-shirts to protest the lives of Black men lost in the United States to police brutality and systemic racism. Unfortunately, that is the reality our Black men face disproportionately as a result of a broken justice system, white supremacy, outright hatred, and divisiveness. However, Black men aren't the only ones affected here because Black boys and children are the target practice as well. For purposes here in this presentation, I want to focus that attention to the contemporary and timely fiction of Colson Whitehead's The Nickel Boys that exposes the racial horrors and injustices inflicted upon a group of young boys at the Nickel Academy. At the height of the Civil Rights Movement, the novel centers around the life of Elwood Curtis and other unlikely cohorts that must endure Jim Crow racism and injustice at every turn at the Academy. As the novel begins, Elwood Curtis is set on a much different path that shouldn't place him anywhere near the abysmal fate that he faces because of a mistake in the choke justice in Florida. Elwood is good as anyone, and his grandmother constantly warns him about the dangers of how Jim Crow takes hold of the Black men she loves. She is overly protective of him and is fearful of him getting caught up in the heat of the movement. Nonetheless, Life magazine pulls Elwood into the wonders of the movement, and he feels emboldened to get involved against her wishes. Elwood's grandmother warns him, quote, "Jim Crow ain't going to just slink off his wicked self," end quote. We learned that when the Brown versus Board of Education ruling came down calling for schools to desegregate, whites do not just fall in line and respect law and order as they expect Black people to do. Expecting white people to do what was right required them to treat Black people as equal citizens, and they were not quite ready for them to be somebodies to them. Throughout the novel, Whitehead employs Dr. Martin Luther King's speeches throughout in order to determine Elwood's own threshold for love and suffering. King's words from the At Zion Hill album gives Elwood his moral compass and direction for Black boyhood. Quote, "We must believe in our souls that we are somebody, that we are significant, that we are worthful, and we must walk the streets of life every day with this sense of dignity and this sense of somebody-ness," end quote. While this message is on target, and I wholeheartedly agree that Black boys possess this somebody-ness King proposes, I must refute his next claim in another speech later in the novel, compelling us to love our oppressors. Quote, "Throw us in jail and we will still love you. Bomb our home and threaten our children, and as difficult as it is, we will still love you. Send your hooded perpetrators of violence into our communities after midnight hours and drag us out onto some wayside road and beat us and leave us half dead, and we will still love you. But be yet assured that we will wear you down by our capacity to suffer, and one day we will win our freedom," end quote. Elwood, along with the other Black boys and men in this novel, experience the horrors and atrocity of what it means to be the nobodies, the undignified, and the neglected, and the forgotten ones. So this paper is my opportunity to not only showcase the strength of who the Black boys are, but also what they can eventually become. I intend to argue here that the Black boys in America do indeed possess a somebody-ness and must not inherit the capacity to suffer under systemic racism in this country in direct opposition to what King asserts in the novel. What makes this novel complex and intriguing at this moment is how history often repeats itself time and time again. Although Whitehead is writing about the 1960s, his novel is based on a true account of a real reform school that operated for 111 years in Florida that warped the lives of many black children. Whitehead brings about an issue in American society that continues to plague our nation, the destruction and neglect of black bodies, as he writes about the abuse unseen and unacknowledged at the hand of white oppressors. Yet, as we see in the narrative, Nickel Academy professes to be in the business of helping Negroes in their own peculiar way. Superintendent Spencer, the voice of Nickel Academy, commands us to understand, quote, everybody's here because they figured out how to be around decent people. That's okay. This is a school and we're teachers. We're going to teach you how to do things like everyone else, end quote. In this regard, Spencer means we're going to teach you boys how to do things like we've always done and to fall in line without any regard to what civil rights or liberties you think you may want or deserve. While Elwood believes all he had to do was just, quote, keep doing what he had always done, act right, end quote, and he'd be out of nickel in no time and in college living his dream. Elwood thinks one thing, but Nickel assures him he is wrong. Elwood's first few days proved to be quite eye-opening, but in the worst ways for him. Attempting to thwart a bully from hurting someone else, Elwood is mistakenly caught by the staff as part of their roundup and is sent to the White House, where he is brutally beaten. The room includes a bloody mattress, naked pillows covered with slobbery stains from previous inmates, a loud industrial fan roaring to hide the screams, and blood-splattered walls. The staff's instructions are pretty clear. Quote, hold on to the rail and don't let go. Make a sound and you'll get more. Shut your fucking mouth, nigger. End quote. And at the Nickel Academy, the staff is keen on teaching the black boys the clear ethics of Jim Crow. The wrath of Black Beauty lands Elwood in the infirmary for more than a week, where he meets fellow inmate student Turner. Turner becomes another voice for Elwood to oppose his inexperience and naivete about what goes on at Nickel, especially since he had been in and out before. He explained, quote, the key to in here is the same as surviving out there. You got to see how people act, and then you got to figure out how to get around them like an obstacle course, end quote. Turner and Elwood immediately become linked by pain, struggle, and survival at Nickel Academy. Whitehead places Turner and Elwood in a symbiotic relationship throughout the novel that serves a compelling purpose for most readers. They help each other just in different ways. Turner often delivers the more straight-up street knowledge that Elwood lacks but clearly needed. Quote, you can change the law, but you can't change people and how they treat each other. Nickel was racist as hell. Half the people who worked there probably dressed up like the Klan on weekends. But the way Turner saw it, wickedness was deeper than skin color. It was Spencer, and it was all the parents who let their children wind up here. It was people, end quote. Turner's pessimism regularly saved him from the anguish and stress that Elwood contemplated over during his time at Nickel. Elwood had not yet understood the white folks' propensity for violence and suffering of the Negro. Harkening back to King's words, Elwood remembers his initial thoughts about love and suffering and its place at Nickel, how much they could or couldn't exist together. The narrator explains, quote, the capacity to suffer. Elwood, all the other Nickel boys, existed in the capacity, breathed it in, ate it in, dreamed it in. That was their lives now. Otherwise, they would have perished. The beatings, the rapes, the unrelenting winnowing of themselves. They endured, end quote. But I would argue, at what cost? These boys have endured traumas that will haunt them well beyond their youth and follow them to their graves, perhaps. Do they even have the capacity to love after all this suffering? Elwood struggles to believe in King's ideals after months of abuse, neglect, and disregard at Nickel. As one of the smart niggers Spencer despises, Elwood has found a way to shorten his time and possibly get out of Nickel for good. Elwood has been secretly plotting to end and destroy Nickel Academy with his journal of corrupt business deals that he and Turner completed on their job duties each week. He would be successful in outing Nickel to the state officials with the help of Turner, but it backfires once they figure out he wrote the letter. He is, of course, punished again by Spencer with a trip to the White House and a meeting with Black Beauty and a week of solitary confinement. Elwood's darkness signals a shift in his mentality, and he comes to the realization that he cannot maintain King's moral proclivity, this capacity to suffer, and this ability to love his oppressor. The narrator alerts us, quote, no, he could not make that leap to love. He understood neither the impulse of the proposition nor the will to execute it, end quote. Elwood fails to succumb to a love that consents to the repeated pain, torture, and degradation under the guise of Jim Crow justice. Spencer, his guards, and his staff constantly treated these boys as perpetual nobodies in their misery machine at the Nickel Academy, a place of hate. Nobody can love that. Turner does his best to forget the Nickel Academy after his eventual escape, as we read in the last section. But the past and trauma are attached to him like a second skin. After breaking Elwood out of the White House before Spencer decides to bury him in the secret graveyard, Turner and he escape. Unfortunately, Elwood is shot and killed. However, Turner keeps running and heads north. In an effort to memorialize his friend, Turner takes his name, opens Ace Moving Company in New York City, and marries a woman named Millie. However, Turner keeps his nickel days a secret because it is too painful for him to share. Turner explains, quote, that's what the school did to a boy. It didn't stop when you got out. Bend you all kind of ways until you were unfit for straight life. Good and twisted by the time you left, end quote. Trauma lingers and remains with us so that it becomes ingrained and undisputable from the reality of what it means to be human, to experience dignity in the everyday. These men now are unsure of how to transition from boys to men, to garner the respect that the Nickel Academy stole from them. If not for a university archaeological project that discovers the secret graveyard at Nickel, then Turner would not be confronting his trauma and sharing his true identity with his wife. With a supportive wife and the courage to finally face his trauma, Turner returns to Florida to finally give Elwood Curtis the burial he deserves. While Whitehead's The Nickel Boys is a work of fiction, the novel itself is inspired by the story of the Dozier School for Boys in Marianna, Florida. Unfortunately, this is the America we know, and the America that exists for Black boys. What is true to understand is that America does not grant dignity or decency to any type of Black man, despite his ability to act right by white standards, as we see in the works of Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me and Damon Young's What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Blacker, a memoir and essays. Both Coates and Young's are integral in helping me to encapsulate the Black male experience the young male characters come to forge in the narrative. What I didn't want to see happen to Elwood in the end unfortunately became his fate, as so many Black boys and men experience at the hand of their white oppressors in this country. Even as much as his grandmother believed him to be one of the good ones, it is Coates that reminds us that his own upbringing as a Black boy in Baltimore brought him the same broken promises. He writes, quote, I had thought I must mirror the outside world, create a carbon copy of white claims to civilization, end quote. Coates writes his memoir as a letter to his own Black son, Samari, in an effort to assure him of what awaits him as a Black man in this country and to let him know he is loved beyond measure. He leaves his son golden gems to help him process his journey of Black boyhood, but also provides guidance to help protect the other Black boys and men as well. Coates so proudly states, quote, the privileges of being Black are not always self-evident, end quote, because we're always fighting just to stand up, to be present, and to exist, so much that we have to just, quote, drink our travesty straight and smile about it, end quote. But he believes there is power in our struggle. In the Nickel Boys, Whitehead wrote about Elwood's courage and determination to bring Nickel Academy down for the corruption and vile act committed against the community of black boys in Florida, housing a secret graveyard of black bodies where, quote, the dirt looked wrong, end quote. In Between the World and Me, Coates riffs on the importance of black bodies in America and how valuable they are to white consumption then and now. Coates even exclaims, quote, in America, it is traditional to destroy the black body. It is heritage, end quote. However, our black boys and men are no longer for sale, and the oppression must cease on the destruction and devaluing of our black bodies. Damon Young's What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Blacker, and Memoir and Essays, is a poignant expose on the ways whiteness positions itself comfortably inside every part of one's existence as a black man in America, with no regret or shame. Using Young here to peer into Whitehead's novel brings fiction to life. His experiences in Philadelphia shows us what it means to be a black boy growing up in the hood, as well as the personal, visceral ramifications it leaves behind. Young describes, quote, I never feel more alive and closer to death than when I'm pondering ways for whiteness to ruin my life, end quote. By the same token, the characters in the Nickel Boys are only a punishment away from the graveyard if they have a fatal error. Their mistakes could be deadly. Young's memoir bounces back and forth discussing his time as a boy, a young man, and an adult in Philadelphia, which often recounts racial encounters, situations, and stories that are all too common. But Young does something different here by infusing humor into the painful reality of how white America truly feels about black men in particular. In the memoir, Young states, quote, white supremacy is so gargantuan and mundane that sometimes its existence and its proficiency can't be measured, addressed, or even seen without a stark change in perspective. It isn't like gravity, it is gravity. It's a ceaseless pressure intended to keep blackness ground-bound and sick, end quote. Thereby, if we even attempted to understand the hows and whys in Whiteside's novel during Jim Crow South, we would have our answer, that those white men were not equipped or even ready to change their perspective about race. To even consider the possibility that black people deserved humanity, just like white men, was even unheard of. Surprisingly, Young also spoke of this very concept as well. Young explains, quote, is that the humanity of whites is the only humanity that matters. Their humanity is the standard all other humanities are judged by. This ceaseless homage toward whiteness affects how physical pain and discomfort are assessed and treated, end quote. Young sets a tone in the memoir that connects readers to the very same one we come to find in Whitehead's novel, to the overall problem in America. It's not black people. I can't breathe. Get your knee off my neck. Black lives matter. Let's stop the attacks on the black bodies in America. It is imperative to see black boys and men for more than the stereotypes and caricatures that the media and society has portrayed them as. And writers like Whitehead, Coates, and Young have positioned black bodies in their rightful places. There may be struggle in our progress for a better America, but we don't have to further this agenda where we stretch this capacity to suffer for our oppressor. Furthermore, Whitehead shows us in what ways we may move forward and how our, quote, very fine ideas about the capacity of human beings can improve, about the capacity of the world to right itself, end quote. What steps are you taking to right your wrongs? Thank you for listening. Have a great day.